Yeah. So I want to welcome you officially to our nervous system nutrition revolution. And this event is something that is 3 years in the making for me. And I'm so grateful for everyone to be here. I have been on this journey learning so much about nutrition, and I just kind of stumbled on the nervous system work, but I didn't, it was really meant to be in my line of sight. And I have just been it's just been such an amazing process. I really have to shout this to everyone. So for years, I thought I was calm. I was holding it all together. I was working long hours. I was raising 4 amazing, beautiful daughters, and everything was racing from one thing to the next and burning the candle at both ends. And I'm sure there's many people who can identify with that. But what I didn't realize is I was actually like running away from a bear, but there was no bear there. I thought I was steady, but really I was numb, and my nervous system was stuck in survival mode, and I didn't even know it. And here's the thing, our nervous system is designed to handle stress. It's okay to have stress. We need stress, and a short burst of stress is healthy. It mobilizes us, it helps us respond. But when that stress never shuts off, when our system doesn't return to balance, then it becomes chronic stress. And that is the stress that leads to chronic inflammation, chronic fatigue, and even eventually chronic illness. And it takes a while, but it can be brewing there for a long time. And that's why, for me, this conversation is so important, because when we talk about a regulated nervous system, it doesn't mean that it's always calm all the time. It means that your nervous system responds appropriately. And when you need to run away from this bear, your body knows what to do. But once that threat passes, you should be able to come back to a point of safety. And if we're not able to do that, then this is where we end up with some of these issues. So the first panel we have here with us, we are going to explore why this happens, how emotions and stress get held in the body, how culture conditions us to disconnect from our own wisdom, and how learning to come back to safety and embodiment changes everything. And this is the foundation for all of the conversations we are going to have over the next 2 days. So I would love to dive in and introduce our speakers. So first I have Philip Shepard, who is an embodiment facilitator. Philip is recognized as a leader in the global embodiment movement. He is the founder of the Embodied Present Process, offering courses, workshops, retreats, and facilitator training worldwide. And he is the author of Radical Wholeness and New Self, New World. And Philip helps people to gently undo cultural conditioning and return the body to the grounded the body as the ground of presence. Welcome, Philip. I'm so grateful to have you here today.
Thanks, Debbie. It's an honor and a privilege to be with you all. Thank you.
Thank you. And we also have Brandon Bays. Brandon is an international best-selling author who is the world's leading authority on mind-body healing and life transformation. She's internationally known for her radically transformative work in cellular healing and emotional well-being. She pioneered the Journey method, and she teaches how clearing long buried emotional wounds stored at the cellular level can unlock deep joy, fulfillment, and freedom, and healing both the body and the being. Again, Brandon, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. And I'm thrilled to be here and to partake in this whole session. Thank you so much.
Okay. So what we're going to do, and for the audience, you are welcome to put questions or comments in the chat. let's get engaged, as I mentioned. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to start with Brandon and then give Philip a chance to answer. And then the next question, Philip gets to start, and we'll take it from there. So Brandon, I would love for you to share a little bit about your personal journey and how you came into your work and how it called you so deeply.
Well, it ended up being a very personal one for me. And I was in the whole field of mind body healing, complementary medicine, and alternative health. And I was living, believing that I was doing everything right. You know, vegetarian food, 70% fresh and raw, and the rest cooked. And I was working out every day, and I was breathing fresh air by the sea, and meditating every day, doing yoga every day. And more important than all those things, I was teaching the Living Health program for Tony Robbins at the time. And so I was living all those principles, and I'd been certified in so many fields of alternative healing. So the last thing I ever expected to have happen was to end up being diagnosed with a basketball-sized tumor. And it really sent me reeling, and it sent me on this radically life-changing healing journey. And part of the gift of that journey was there was a lot of work it happened in 1993. And there was a lot of work going on in the field of cellular healing at that time. And so I was definitely at the cutting edge of what was happening in that field. And so once the doctor had told me that I'd been diagnosed with this massive mass, even though you would think with all the certifications and degrees I had in this field, that I would have taken that news with some sort of, acceptance, calm. But I got to tell you, my heart was beating through the roof and my mind going a million miles a minute. And I can remember walking outside the doctor's office with holding the hand of my best friend. And at this point, I'd gotten a very bad prognosis. And so I was really reeling from it all. And she basically said, if we can't get the bleeding to stop in the next 3 days, you're going to have to go into surgery and have this removed. And so being in the field of alternative healing, this was the last thing I wanted. And so I got her to agree that if I could get the bleeding to stop over the next 3 days, she'd give me a month to give it my best shot. And I can remember stepping outside that office and having gotten that news, and my mind just going a million miles a minute. And I looked up in front of me, and there was a mimosa tree, a beautiful tree that looked like golden rain that I hadn't even noticed going in. And as I looked at that tree, it was as if time stopped, and my racing thinking mind just wound down. And out of nowhere, waves of gratitude came through. Gratitude to see a tree, to see the golden blossoms, to smell a fragrance I hadn't even smelled going into the offices. And as I stood there in this timeless silence, out of nowhere came a gut knowing. Somehow I would be guided to heal. And though I didn't know how that would be, I was so grateful for the work going on in the field of cellular healing, and specifically for Dr. Deepak Chopra at the time, who'd done a radical thing as a doctor. He decided to study patients who had serious illness who healed without medical intervention, drugs, or surgery. And after amassing hundreds and ultimately thousands of case studies, he could find that they had only two qualities in common. One is that through some act of grace or spontaneous event, they actually got access to this that he calls the infinite intelligence, the part of you that makes your heart beat and your eyes shine and your hair grow. The second thing they got access is this that he calls the cell memory. And what we know about the cells inside the body is that when we feel a strong emotion and we repress it, we shut it down, it releases a quantifiable biochemistry into the body that goes to certain cellular locations. So that whole trauma, that pain, it gets stored in specific areas of the body. And before those cells die, it passes on its programming to the next cell generation. So the next cell generation is born as an exact replica of the previous one. And that these people who healed without drugs or surgery somehow spontaneously got access to those cell memories. And if somehow they released what was stored there and let it go, when the new cells were born, They were born devoid of that old consciousness as new regenerative cells. Now, I knew all this. I knew the science. I'd seen the case studies, but you can know all the science on the planet, understand how the cells get things stored inside the body. But unless you have a method, it's nothing more than a bunch of inspiration on a page. And yet that's where I stood. And yet I had, in that timeless Satori moment, the gut knowing I would be guided to heal. And so the great gift of my own healing was I found a direct, repeatable, practical means for all of us to open into that infinite intelligence, into this vast field of love that you came in at, and to be guided by that to specific cellular locations in the body to uncover the old pain, the trauma, the old consciousness there, to go through a deep process of release and letting go, understanding, ultimately forgiveness, so that when the new cells are born, they're born devoid of that old consciousness, as new regenerative cells. And so, long story short, in 6.5 weeks' time, I ended up at Cedars-Sinai Hospital and completely textbook perfect, clean, tumor-free. And so that work is now being used by cancer centers, by medical doctors, and by people from all walks of life around the world. And so it is a deeply personal story, and it's profoundly awe-inspiring and humbling to me what a healing machine our bodies are, and how we're all capable of participating in our own healing journeys.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing your story. And, I picked up so many different things as you were sharing that. But what you said at the very end, our bodies are this amazing machine. They want to heal us. They want to be in that space. So if we give it the right nourishment, whatever that means, this is where we can heal and have the kind of health that our body is craving to have for us. So thank you for sharing, Brandon. Philip, I'm going to ask you now to tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. First, I'd like to say what a pleasure it is to meet Brandon. It's my introduction to you, Brandon, and truly a delight. Thank you. My story began really in my teenagehood when I felt radically at odds with my own culture, at odds with its rules that seemed arbitrary, at odds with its values that seemed imbalanced. And so there was this desire within me to cleanse myself, to rid myself of the ways in which my culture was trying to make me smaller. And I faced a choice at the age of 18. I'd been accepted to study physics on the one hand at university. And then there was this possibility of going to England and buying a bicycle and heading off for Japan. And so it's the latter that I chose. And it was, it was motivated by a sort of rage, I guess, at this, the ways in which my being was being undermined. But beneath that, it was motivated by love, a love of life, a love of being that I didn't want to feel it so compromised. And so I, got on my bike and headed off for Japan, and I passed through so many different ways of understanding what it means to be human, very different from the culture in which I'd been raised. And every one of those was luminous, and every one of those was limited. And it was so much easier for me to see the limitations of a culture that was new to me than my own. The reason for leaving was that I understood if I remained within my culture, I would not be able to question what I'd so deeply habituated to, because normal had been established for me by my culture, and so difficult to question what has been accepted as normal. So I was gone for 2 years, and I made it to Japan and had extraordinary experiences along the way. And when I came back, I was able to question my culture. What had hitherto seemed normal looked absolutely arbitrary and strange. And so my questioning began. Along the way, I became an actor. I had a passion for acting. In fact, the reason I chose Japan was to study classical Japanese no theater. And there I was as a teenager studying this strange 600-year-old theatrical tradition in which the belly center, what the Japanese call hara, was primary, and every gesture of a no actor is is originated in that intelligence. A head turns and sees, it's seeing from that place, not from here, but from deep within the body. So what a gift that was for me to encounter that. And in acting, of course, any acting exercise, it's ultimately just another way of learning to be present. And so I learned to be present to my body. I learned to be present, and allow my voice to come from the whole of my being rather than the way we're taught to deliver it, from the throat, from the chest. And I also studied for 5 years with an energy healer who also had a story of cancer. He was given 3 weeks to live, and he healed himself with a modality that has been really central to my growth. And then I started writing, and I wrote a book called New Self, New World, and it took me 10 years to write it. And it was such an adventure. And I rewrote it from scratch 4 times. And eventually, it was published, and I began teaching practices that help people identify what they've been habituated to, the ways in which our culture has shaped their embodied experience, and heal those gaps, those islands of desensitivity. So I've got over 300 practices, and as you mentioned, I teach those and love sharing them with people, because our culture has thrown the pelvic floor into neglect. It has suppressed the breath. It has turned the legs into prosthetics. It has neglected the back and the breath in the back. There's so much that has been shaped within our being that we're unaware of, because it's the way everyone around us has been shaped.
When I heard you, when you and I met and you told me a little bit about your story, all I could say is what a gift for you to have that, I don't know if I call it wherewithal, but to actually take and go on that journey. For most people, that would be way outside of their level of safety, and they would stay where they are. But to do that and to be able to come back and understand the, culture, is just like such a amazing story that way. And, I had this, my awakening came for me probably when I turned 60. And to have the gift of learning that at a young age is, I wish that for every young person, for sure. So thank you for sharing again. So Philip, I'm going to ask the next question, and you get to start on this one. So many women will feel like they're doing everything right, and that they still feel exhausted. They're eating clean. And like Brendan said, right? She was eating clean. She was doing all this stuff, and yet they still feel exhausted. How does our nervous system and this dysregulation show up in our daily life? And why is it so often that we overlook it?
Yeah, I mean, where I go to with that question is the fact that we are trained to live in our heads. And we take it as normal. Of course you live in that. It's where the brain is. It's where your eyes and ears are. Of course you live in your head. But it's, culturally, it's a deep anomaly. I've not encountered any indigenous culture that understands living in the head. There's a great story. Carl Jung was visiting America and met with a Pueblo chief, and the chief at a certain point in their conversation admitted that the Pueblo people consider the white man to be crazy. And Jung took that in and said, well, what is it about us that makes you say that? And his answer was, well, you're so restless. You're never at peace. And Carl Jung took that in and saw what he was saying and say, why do you think that's the case? And he said to Carl Jung, well, you say you think with your head. And Jung was, well, yes. What do you think with? And he pointed to his heart and he said, we think here. So this idea of thinking with the head, in the Okanagan culture, there's a similar story. Jeanette Armstrong is an elder in the Okanagan culture, and she tells a story where her grandmother and her father and she were looking down at the village, the town below them, and her grandmother said, you know, those people are insane. And if you look at the Okanagan word for insane, it translates literally as talking inside the head. That is how we live. That's of course we're talking inside the head all day long. And to them, that's insanity. So the dysregulation of living in the head is primarily a dissociation from the body. And that is the chief characteristic of trauma. You know, trauma is a dissociation from the body. So in that regard, we've been dysregulated by this traumatic separation of the head from the body. And then we are ruled by ideas. So this idea that you mentioned, where we're trying to do everything right, what a burden to have this idea of how you should live and have that imposed on your life. And then you need to conform to this. And it's just dissociated from the body's deep knowing. And so we're imposing these ideas on how we should live. And, you know, in my experience, that falls more heavily on women than on men. This notion of the right way to be, and it you know, the box within which women are encouraged to live is a pretty small, tidy, organized, proper box. And how to let go of doing everything right and come back to what the body so deeply knows. You know, that carries us out of aloneness into the companionship of the present. And in that, you know, we are regulated not by the self, but by the present. I don't think there's such a thing as self-regulation. I think if you're self-regulating, you're in a divided state, and a divided state is dysregulated. So I think what we call self-regulation are actually means of coming back to the present. And I know when I allow myself to be fully present, the harmony that seeps into and through my being is unlike anything I could manufacture for myself.
Yeah, it's so true that we are living in our head and intellectualize a lot. So yeah, and it's not always easy to get out of that intellectualizing, but it's beautiful. Live in the body, live in the present. Brandon, I'll give you an opportunity now.
Okay. Well, let me approach from a slightly different perspective and go back to about our relationship to emotions. And one of the things that most of us have learned how to do is any strong emotion that is uncomfortable, we found a way either to shut it down, run from it, smoke it away, drink it away, get on Facebook, surf the web, watch a Netflix, do anything, but actually feel what our body's feeling. And there's a danger in that, because when we're constantly on the run from what is being felt inside the body, i.e., ignoring the body, we fly ourselves into motion, into action, and go into doership, constantly doing the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, and the next thing. But the body, it never lies. And the more you ignore it, the more it tries to get your attention. And in my case, I ended up having this huge wake-up call where I got diagnosed with this tumor. Now you have to understand, for me, having been in this field and a kinesiologist and a herbalist and an iridologist and on a, medical hypnosis, NLP therapist, on and on. So I had all the tools and lived and breathed those. But when my own tummy started to grow, I just didn't want to believe it was happening. And so it got to a point where I couldn't even zip up my trousers. The wake-up call was there, but I ignored it by suddenly wearing long flowing dresses. And it wasn't until I was sitting in meditation one day that I got the wake-up call where my mind had gone completely still. And the words are, you might be seriously ill. You need to get real and call a doctor today. And I can remember coming out of that meditation and just waves of shame coming over me that here I am, I'm, known around the world for doing what I do, and I might be seriously ill. And not only that, I'm living, breathing, doing everything that is supposedly the healthiest, most vibrant for vibrant living. And there was so much shame involved that I didn't even have the guts to call up the doctor that my friend was going to. Instead, I went to the local bookshop, to the shelves where women's, issues were, and I pulled down a book there from a woman who did not advocate hysterectomies. I could see where it was growing. And so we are trained and conditioned to override our emotions, anything that's uncomfortable, and to be on the run. And the second thing that we're trained to do and conditioned, as Phil was saying, is that we're trained to shut our emotions down and to run from them, hide them. Now, these emotions, these strong emotions, when they get buried in the body, these trauma, they start having a life of their own. And as they get passed on from one cell generation to the next cell generation, to the next cell generation, if they remain ignored, I mean, when I went to the doctor, she said to me the first thing, this probably started as one cell when you were 8 years old. And it replicated and became 2 cells. And in the last months before I got to her, where it was this mass, it was replicating exponentially and aggressively. And so we're all conditioned to keep moving forward, as Phil says, and to ignore what the body's telling you and to ignore the emotions. But eventually they're going to catch up with you. And so what happens is the emotions are rising in your body. And so that's like a gas pedal is on. And then with us pushing it away, running from it, shutting it down, freezing in the face of emotion, that's putting brakes on it. And this action, what it does to the nervous system is one foot's on the gas pedal, one foot's on the brake, and you imagine what that does to an engine in a car. That's what it's doing to our nervous system, which then creates the exhaustion. It's the constant body's need to give rise to what's stored there, and then our own need to shut it down because it's just too uncomfortable. And this internal friction dysregulates the nervous system to a point where often people come to the journey and the exhaustion is extreme. I mean, nearly on the floor kind of exhaustion. And it's because of this friction going on in the nervous system. And so with the journey, what we're doing is we're going into those areas that we would have done anything to avoid and uncovering what's stored there and releasing that old stored pain, coming to an understanding of what took place in that trauma. Also coming to a place of forgiveness where we let go of our story of pain so that when the new cells are born, they're born devoid of that old consciousness as new regenerative cells. And so this is a kind of a different aspect of not only coming from head, but also looking at what our response to emotions is actually doing to our nervous system.